You didn't have to do that.
Maybe so.
But a man doesn't stand by when an innocent is hunted. Especially when that man made a promise to her father.
"I tame wild horses better than your men," said the Apache. The rancher laughed until he saw her break the beast with her bare hands. In the scorched earth of July 1878, beneath a sky the color of bleached bone, a lone rider emerged from the desolate ridges outside Tombstone, Arizona. The land was brittle and sharp, the kind that could cut a man even when he stood still. Dust rose in thin spirals from every hoofbeat of his tired bay horse, curling into the air, as if reluctant to leave the ground. The man was Ezra Stone, carved by years of silence and solitude, his face a roadmap of sun-scorched plains, a weathered ledger of sins he no longer confessed. For 3 long months he had not spoken to another soul, his days nothing more than a quiet pattern of mending fences, tending to a small herd, and lying awake at night while the coyotes called like broken prayers. His leather duster, worn to the color of the dirt itself, clung to him as a second skin. The Colt at his hip was no longer a weapon to him, it was a burden, a shadow that breathed with him. The stillness that surrounded him was not peace. It was the kind of stillness a man feels before the sky tears open with lightning, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of the neck stand as if ghosts are breathing against the skin. Then it came a sound that did not belong to wind or desert animal. From the canyon pass to the east, the silence split apart. A choked scream, raw and desperate, shattered the air, cut short by the wet thud of something hitting the ground. Ezra's head snapped toward it. His heart, long beaten down into a slow rhythm by solitude, slammed violently against his ribs. Trouble had found him again, the kind of trouble he had abandoned the world to avoid. If you like Wild West love stories, drop one in your place in the comments so I know where you're listening from. The dust from her herd churned the morning air into a hazy veil, a fitting backdrop for the ghosts of Ezra's past. He had never been one for talking much about his feelings, but seeing her, a ghost from a life he'd tried to bury, brought every regret bubbling to the surface. It was a mournful, hollow ache, like the wind whistling through a broken window pane. It was a lonely, gut-wrenching pain that reminded him of all the promises he couldn't keep. Ezra rose from the porch with the stiffness of a man who had learned not to expect company. The floorboards beneath his boots groaned like old bone. His hand stayed on the Colt's worn handle, not out of eagerness but resignation. He shoved his feet into the scuffed boots, slung the rifle, and stepped off the porch toward the canyon. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that he was walking into a story already written before he ever arrived. The dust of morning was thick with heat and memory. From the ridgeline he saw it, a herd moving like smoke, wild mustangs cutting the air into ribbons of muscle and fury, and at their head, her, Ayanna, a woman guiding them with movements so subtle it seemed sorcery. She was no apparition, though Ezra's heart told him she might as well be one. Ayanna, daughter of the Apache, with hair black as raven wings spilling loose around her shoulders, her body moving with the horses, as if born of the same breath. Her deerskin tunic was worn, edges frayed by desert winds, but she carried herself with a dignity that no hardship could strip away. Ezra's throat tightened. He remembered her father, a man of granite and silence, a man to whom Ezra had once made a promise. A promise he had failed, like so many others. Seeing her now was like watching regret rise up from the ground in flesh and bone. Every step she took was a knife against his ribs. The mustangs obeyed her as though tied by invisible threads. She raised a hand, and the led mare slowed. The rest of the herd flowed behind in seamless order. No whip cracked, no rope forced obedience. She spoke in words the wind seemed to understand, and the wild creatures bent willingly to her voice. Ezra had broken horses his whole life, using rope, sweat, and blood. But what he saw here was no breaking. It was communion. It humbled him more than any defeat he had ever known. From his cabin, his youngest hand, Jimmy, the kid heart, stumbled out half-dressed, boots unlaced, hair wild from sleep. People called Ezra red because of the streaks of auburn in his hair, and because of the years he'd spent in the violence that had stained his life crimson. Jimmy's eyes widened at the sight. "Red, you see in this," he whispered, pointing across the pasture, his voice trembling as though he were staring at a ghost. Ezra lowered the telescope, his jaw tightening. "I'm seeing it, kid. But I don't believe it. Get me my rifle and boots. Tell the others to saddle up. Keep your distance, though. I need to know who she is and what she wants with my land." The boy darted back inside, moving with the nervous urgency of someone who knew the impossible demanded witnesses. Ezra's gaze never left Ayanna as she slid down from her mare with a grace that seemed unearthly. Her moccasins made no sound against the hard earth. Around her neck glimmered a turquoise necklace that caught the light like fragments of sky stones Ezra recognized. Her father's stones. Ezra's breath caught. 15 years he had given this land, turning dust and thorn into a ranch men respected. He had come to believe he understood horses better than he had ever understood people. But watching her, moving among 12 wild mustangs with nothing more than touch and whispered words, he felt like a boy again, fumbling with wooden toys in a world too vast to grasp. The horses, untamed as wind, stood calmly under her hands, their ears forward, eyes gentle, chests rising with steady breaths. They were not conquered. They were understood. But the beauty of that moment cracked when another dust cloud appeared smaller, sharper, and carrying menace. 4 riders cut through the canyon, spurs biting hard, pistols glinting at their sides. At their lead rode Silas Thorne. Ezra felt bile rise in his throat. Thorne, a man with the soul of a viper, his pockets lined by others' suffering, a man Ezra had fought too many small wars against. Land rights, water rights, cattle disputes. Every quarrel had left behind scars deeper than bullets. Now Thorne was here, and his eyes were not on Ezra. They were on Ayanna. His stallion skidded to a halt, hooves tearing furrows into the ground. The other riders fanned out behind him, circling like wolves. Well, well," Thorne drawled, his voice soaked in venom, "if it ain't old Red Stone." His gaze, however, clung to Ayanna like a snake tasting the air. "Hand her over. My riders saw you driving a wild herd to throw dust over my ore wagons. Don't play dumb, girl. You're running cover for thieves." Ayanna stepped forward, face calm though her dark eyes burned with fire. "I have nothing of yours." Her voice cut through the dry air with clarity that carried both defiance and sorrow. Thorne laughed, a sound without mirth, brittle as bones snapping. "Don't lie to me, girl. My men saw you. Now, we can do this the easy way, or the hard way. Red, you gonna step aside, or you gonna die for this thief?" The slur hit Ezra like a lash, but it was the echo of a promise that truly held him. A promise made long ago to Ayanna's father that he would protect her if the world ever turned its teeth against her. He had failed once. He would not fail again. His hand drifted to the Colt at his hip, fingers curling around its familiar weight. He looked from Thorne's sneer to Ayanna's steady gaze. Then he spoke, voice low and hard as the stones beneath their feet. "She ain't going anywhere, Silas. Not with you. Not today. Not ever. Get off my land." The words were more than defiance. They were confession, redemption, and damnation all bound together. Ezra knew as they left his lips that they sealed his fate. This choice would ignite a fire, one that would consume land, cattle, and men alike. A fire born not of romance but of honor. A fire that would burn until nothing remained but truth, sorrow, and the fragile beginnings of a cowboy love story that no desert wind could ever erase. The standoff was short but searing. Silas and his men, surprised by Ezra's sudden and unwavering defense of a woman they saw as little more than a stray animal, hesitated. Silas's eyes, cold and calculating, darted between Ezra and the ranch hands, who had just ridden up, their hands on their guns. He knew Ezra was no stranger to violence. His reputation as a man of his word and his considerable skills with a rifle were things he had been wise to respect in the past. "This ain't over, Ezra," Thorne spat, turning his horse with a theatrical jerk of the reins. "You've just made yourself an enemy of the whole territory. This is a debt you'll pay, and it won't be in gold." With that, they wheeled their horses and rode off. The dust cloud they created a stark contrast to the morning sun now rising higher in the sky. The moment they were gone, the tension didn't evaporate. It shifted. settling between Ayanna and Ezra. She watched him with those deep, intelligent eyes, a mix of wariness and something he couldn't quite decipher. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I can handle my own battles." "Maybe so," Ezra replied, holstering his Colt. "But a man doesn't stand by when an innocent person is being hunted, especially when that man made a promise to her father." Her composure faltered for a moment, a flash of surprise crossing her face. "You knew my father?" "Tall Tree," Ezra said, the name feeling like a sacred word on his tongue. "We served together, though on different sides of the war at times. We fought a common enemy, and we fought with honor. He saved my life more than once." Ezra didn't mention the way he had failed to save his, or the guilt that had haunted him ever since. "He asked me to look after his people, to honor the land, to keep my word. I didn't. I'm trying to start now." Her gaze softened, and for the first time, Ezra saw a glimmer of trust. But it was fleeting. "The white man's promises are as brittle as autumn leaves," she said, turning away. "They break as soon as the wind changes direction." Her words cut deep, but Ezra knew she was right. He had seen it with his own eyes. His own past was a testament to that bitter truth. The trust he had lost, the promises he had broken, all of them came rushing back. The memory of his failure to protect her father, the one man who had shown him true honor, weighed on him like a millstone. The Wild West was built on broken promises, on stolen land, and lives shattered by greed. That was the grim, ugly truth of it. And in that moment, Ezra knew he had to be different. He had to prove her wrong, not just for her sake, but for his. For the sake of the man he used to be, for the soul he'd lost. Ezra made an offer, a simple one, based on the principle of partnership she had shown with the horses. "You need a place to hide. They'll be back, and they'll bring more men. You can stay here, on my land, in my cabin, for as long as it takes for this to blow over. In exchange, you train these wild horses. We both get something out of it." She hesitated, her eyes scanning the vast, open land, the red rocks and the endless sky. It was a place she knew, a place her people had called home for generations before it was stolen from them. She was a woman of the wilderness, and trusting a white man's structure, a white man's home, was a difficult thing for her. "I don't need a roof over my head. I have shelter in the canyon," she said. "It's not just about shelter, it's about safety. They won't expect to find you here, in the heart of my ranch. It's the last place they'd look for you. It's a calculated risk, for both of us." Ezra's voice was calm and steady, but he was gambling everything. Her gaze met his. There was a quiet strength in her, a resolve that had been forged in a life of hardship. "What Silas said about the gold, it's a lie. I was searching for something else, something they stole from my people." Her admission was a turning point. It wasn't about a simple crime anymore. It was about justice, the kind of justice that rarely existed out here. "Then we'll get it back," Ezra said, not as a promise, but as a statement of fact. "Whatever it is, we'll get it back. Together." Their partnership was born out of necessity, a fragile truce between two people scarred by the past. They worked side by side, she with her quiet, intuitive methods, he with his rigid, hard-won experience. He watched, mesmerized, as she worked her magic on the horses, her hands speaking a language they understood, a language of respect and patience. She didn't break their spirit. She asked them to share it, and they responded. The long days were filled with work, with the sun beating down on their backs, the dust rising with every hoofbeat. But the evenings were different. They would sit on the porch, the silence between them slowly becoming comfortable. She would tell him stories about her people, about the spirit of the land, about the traditions that had been all but erased, and he would listen, the cold knot of guilt in his stomach slowly loosening. She didn't press him about his past, but he felt a need to confess, to lay bare the shame that had haunted him for so long. "I promised your father I'd look out for you," Ezra said one night. "The stars so bright they seemed to pierce the blackness of the sky. But after the war, I lost my way. I was a different man, a broken man. I came out here to forget, to bury everything I was before. but you can't bury the past. It just comes back to haunt you. She listened patiently, her expression unreadable in the moonlight. The past is a heavy sack, she said finally, her voice like a whisper of sand on a dune. But we are not meant to carry it alone. My father would not want you to carry his death on your shoulders, Ezra. He would want you to live, to find your honor again. And now, you are. You are doing it now. Her words were a balm to his weary soul. She didn't absolve him of his sins, but she gave him a path to redemption. It wasn't a romance born of a dance hall waltz, but something earned trust forged under a copper sky. It was a love that had to be earned, built brick by brick with trust and sacrifice, under the vast, watchful eye of the copper sky. Out here, Wild West love stories aren't written in ink, but in dust, sweat, and vows kept when no one is watching. They fled the next morning, leaving Ezra's ranch abandoned to silence. The morning sun was merciless, a brutal, relentless eye staring down from the heavens, its fire beating upon their backs as they rode hard into the canyons. The desert shimmered like a furnace, every rock glowing red, as if forged in hell's own anvil. Ezra's shirt clung damp to his skin, salt crusting at his collar, the taste of dust coating his tongue. Before them stretched only jagged stone, narrow passes, and the uncertain mercy of the land itself. The wind from the Mogollon Rim carried the dry scent of creosote bush and the far-off whistle of a Gambel's quail. Silas Thorne wasn't merely a rancher or a businessman. He was a rattlesnake in human flesh, and the men who rode for him were his nest of vipers. He paid them in gold and blood, and they scoured the desert with the same hunger wolves gave to bone. They would not stop, not until they had claimed what they believed was theirs, Ayanna. They had no choice but to keep moving, trading the familiar safety of Ezra's land for the brutal shelter of the canyons. The very earth that had hidden her once now became their only shield. And in those burning hours of flight, Ezra found himself leaning not on his rifle, nor on the battle drills drilled into him by years in uniform, but on her. Ayanna read the land as a preacher reads scripture, her dark eyes scanning the ridges, her body tilting in the saddle with an instinct older than any map. She tasted the wind, studied the fall of loose stones, listened to the cries of hawks high above. Where Ezra saw only rock and dust, she read warnings and pathways, secrets whispered by ancestors who had walked here long before his kind ever dreamed of fences and deeds. Her wisdom was a stark contrast to his own brute reliance on powder and steel. They rode through a full day and deep into the night. The stars burned cold and merciless, while the moon painted the canyon walls silver. Their horses, foamed with sweat, slowed only when Ayanna raised her hand and signaled a brief rest. They chewed jerky so dry it scraped the throat, sipped from canteens that grew lighter with each passing mile, and then pushed onward again. The chase was relentless, like a shadow that never tired. Yet beneath the exhaustion, Ezra felt something he had not known in years, a purpose that went deeper than survival. This was no longer about hiding from his past. It was about facing it head-on, fighting for it, in the form of this proud, quiet woman who had dared to place her trust in him. By the time the second night fell, they huddled beside a thin fire tucked into the crook of a canyon wall. The flames were small, shielded from the wind, but they lit her face in a soft glow. She had been silent for hours, but at last her voice rose, almost a whisper that carried more weight than a shout. "Silas's men," she said, eyes fixed on the fire. "They don't just want me because of the gold." Ezra turned, the flames reflecting in his weary eyes. "Then what is it they're after?" "They want the things I'm looking for. They believe my people hid something valuable here, something they've searched for a long time." Her hands slipped inside her tunic, and when they emerged, they held a small, worn leather pouch. She untied it carefully, reverently, as though it were more fragile than glass. From within, she drew a sliver of polished stone, no bigger than a man's thumb, carved with symbols Ezra did not recognize. "It's a map," she whispered, holding it so the firelight danced across its surface. "My grandfather carved it before our people were driven to San Carlos, what they mock as Hell's 40 acres. It marks the place where our elders hid what Silas calls treasure." Ezra frowned, the name of that reservation striking him like a whip. I've heard the stories. Her eyes darkened. Stories don't tell the hunger, the fever, the children buried along the way. She swallowed hard, then held the stone higher. This is not gold, not silver. It is the place of our medicine bundles, our songs, our sacred items. Silas believes it is wealth. But it is our soul, our history. The fire popped. Ezra's chest tightened with a lump he could not swallow. The injustice of it, the sheer audacity of a man trying to steal not just land or cattle, but the very identity of a people, ignited a cold, violent rage inside him. Her voice trembled then, but her gaze did not waver. There is more. A reason I seek it now. Ezra leaned closer. Tell me, lad. Silas has taken children, orphans, from my band. She paused, and her hands tightened on the pouch. He uses them in his mine. Slave labor, searching for what he calls treasure. He holds them ransom. He knows if I find the sacred place, I will come to him. He uses our own blood against us. The weight of her words fell upon Ezra like a mountain. It was not only about her, or about this shard of stone. It was about children, innocent, voiceless lives caught in the web of a greedy man's ambition. Ezra stared into the flames, his jaw clenched. In the crackle of burning wood, he heard the ghosts of his own past, the men he had failed to protect in war, the promises broken, the families shattered. But beside those ghosts rose something new, something fiercer. This was his chance to make it right, not with the dead, with the living. We'll get them back, he said, his voice a growl from the depths of his chest. And we'll get your map. We'll end this, Ayanna, for good. She turned her face toward him, firelight catching in her dark eyes. Fear flickered there, yes, but beneath it glimmered something fragile hope. You would do that? She whispered. For children you've never seen? For people not your own? Ezra exhaled slow, steady, letting the words come as truth rather than vow. I do it for my own soul. I've run long enough. If we fight for honor and justice, then it is my fight too. I can think of no better way to live or to die. For the first time in a decade, the words did not taste bitter. They felt alive, real. Her lips parted, as though to speak, but instead she simply nodded, clutching the stone to her chest. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with something unspoken, a bond formed in firelight and danger, a fragile thread between two broken lives. Ezra leaned back, staring at the sky where stars burned holes into the black. For the first time since the war, he felt something shift inside him. He was not merely existing anymore. He was living, and he was ready to spill blood, sweat, and tears for a justice that went beyond himself. A justice carved not in gold, but in sacrifice. This was cowboy justice, the kind the desert demanded, merciless, raw, but honest. A justice that guarded the weak, that stood in the way of snakes like Silas Thorne. And in that moment, Ezra knew, this story was no longer just his, it was theirs. Before first light, they traced the ridge toward Thorne's mine, their reckoning set to break before another dawn. Their plan was audacious, reckless to the point of madness, and by all rights it should have been a suicide mission. Silas's mining camp was no mere outpost. It was a sprawling settlement carved deep into the scar of a canyon, a lawless hive that stank of sweat, coal dust, and spilled whiskey. Men there had long since forgotten decency. Murderers, cutthroats, deserters, men with bounty on their heads, they found safe haven in Thorne's pay. To walk into that den was to step willingly into the viper's nest. But Ayanna and Ezra carried two advantages, fragile as they were. She bore the intimate knowledge of the land, its veins of stone and hidden gullies, and Ezra carried the scarred memory of war, of night raids and silent infiltration, of slipping past sentries whose eyes dulled in the darkness. They were a strange pair. A weathered cowboy with ghosts in his saddlebag, and an Apache woman whose very presence seemed to bend the wild mustangs to her will. Yet for all their differences, one fire united them: save the stolen children and reclaim a piece of her people's soul. The journey to the camp tested every nerve they had. They moved only under cover of night. The desert, a black ocean around them. The wind sang low and mournful through the canyon walls, carrying the scent of mesquite smoke and the faint clang of hammers striking ore. Patrols roved the trails like wolves on the hunt, lanterns swinging, rifles gleaming. They learned to breathe with the earth, to crouch low among rocks until boots passed by, to step only when the wind covered their sound. Ezra stole glances at her, always at her. Even in the blackness, she moved with quiet strength, her silhouette cutting against the stars with the elegance of something not bound by this world. She was no fragile porcelain beauty. She was the wilderness itself, raw, untamed, dangerous, and breathtaking. Watching her stirred memories Ezra thought he had buried with his youth. A battlefield in another land, faces of men he had lost, promises he had failed. Yet beside her, he felt not the weight of those ghosts, but the pull of something alive. They reached the camp's edge after 3 nights of crawling through thorn and stone. From the ridge they saw it, the glow of dozens of fires, the shouts of drunken men, the hammering of metal, and within the crude stockade at the canyon's floor, the children. Ezra would never forget that sight. They were huddled together like shadows of themselves, their faces gaunt, their eyes too old for their years. Some bore lashes on their backs, others coughed from the choking dust. And then he saw him, a boy with eyes like flint, wide and proud, a spark refusing to die. He was the mirror image of Tall Tree, a warrior Ezra had once fought beside. That boy's defiance struck Ezra harder than any bullet. In that moment, he knew with a certainty sharper than steel, this wasn't just a mission, this was a reckoning. They moved closer, ghosts in the dark. But fate is never kind to desperate men. From the doorway of a mine shack, a figure stepped into the firelight. His gait Ezra knew before his face. Corporal Briggs. Ezra's throat closed. Once, in another life, they had shared rations, mud, and blood. Briggs had dragged him out from under cannon fire, and Ezra had carried him 3 miles with a bullet in his leg. A brother, once. But the man before him now was no brother. His eyes caught Ezra's, and in them flickered a spark of recognition, of old loyalty, quickly strangled by greed. He had chosen his path, and it was Silas's. "Ezra Stone," Briggs said, his voice low, carrying across the firelit dust. "Should have known it'd be you." Ezra felt the old weight settle on him, the memory of every order he had given that sent boys to their deaths. His jaw clenched. "Briggs," he answered, his voice gravel. "Didn't think you'd sink this far." Briggs smiled, but it was a smile emptied of warmth. "A man's gotta eat. Gold feeds better than ghosts." And then it began. The plan they had so carefully laid shattered like glass. Gunfire tore through the night. Flames roared higher. Men shouted in confusion. Briggs had known. He had been waiting. The canyon erupted into chaos, and every shot fired was a duel, not only with Silas's men but with the man Ezra had once been. Ayanna did not falter. She did not run or hide. She fought like the desert itself had risen in her blood. Her bow sang in the dark, arrows hissing like vipers, striking true before the enemy even knew she had moved. She used the rocks, the shadows, the wind turning terrain into weapon, silence into blade. She was a whirlwind, a warrior reborn, her cries carrying the weight of generations forced into silence. Ezra fought beside her, rifle thundering, each shot tearing through the veil of guilt he had carried. Yet the battle was no clean affair. Men swarmed them, and in every flash of muzzle fire, Ezra saw the ghosts of the war, faces of comrades, of enemies, of boys too young to have died. The canyon floor became a graveyard of his past and his present colliding. And then Silas himself emerged. His hulking frame strode from the chaos, a shotgun gripped in his hands, his teeth bared in a wolfish grin. Flames licked at his shadow, as though the devil himself crowned him. "This is a waste of time, Red," he roared, his voice rising over the din. "You'll die here for these worthless brats and a useless trinket?" His words were venom, but Ezra did not answer with speech. He leveled his rifle, breath steady, gaze locked on him. This was the moment he had run from all his life, the line drawn in dust and blood. His honor against Thorne's greed. Ayanna's memory against Thorne's contempt. Ayanna moved closer, her hand brushing his for the briefest instant. Not in fear, but in solidarity. In that touch was trust, fierce and fragile. "This isn't about gold, Silas," Ezra said at last, voice carrying above the gunfire. "It's about kids and the right to remember. You don't get either." This. The world seemed to narrow to the width of his rifle barrel. His heart pounded like war drums, every breath a prayer he did not know he could still speak. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was a final test of his soul. Behind him, the children cried. Beside him, Ayanna fought like fire and wind. Before him, Silas sneered with his shotgun. It was the desert's judgment, the moment where everything Ezra's love, his honor, his sins balanced on the edge of a trigger. This was no longer a story of gold or artifacts. It was a story of reckoning, of blood spilled for the innocent, of justice carved in flame. And Ezra knew, as his finger tightened, that this was not just the fight of a cowboy. This was the final test of his soul. The climax was a blur of smoke and thunder, a savage storm of lead and fire that devoured the canyon. The echoes of gunfire bounced from rock to rock like the drums of Judgment Day. When the smoke cleared, Silas Thorne lay sprawled on the dusty ground, his shotgun a useless hunk of iron at his side, his lifeblood staining the desert that had once bowed to his greed. His eyes, wide in shock, stared up at the pitiless sky as if demanding an answer he would never receive. Greed had finally caught him, and justice, hard, cold, and merciless, had claimed its due. They had won. The children were safe. The sacred artifacts, wrapped carefully in Ayanna's hands, were secured. She held the worn leather pouch to her chest with a reverence that spoke louder than any sermon. Her face was streaked with dirt and exhaustion, hair tangled by wind and battle, but there was a glow in her dark eyes that not even the desert could dim. She was a warrior and a keeper of memory, and in that moment she seemed both mortal and eternal. As for Ezra, he was battered, bruised, his shirt torn, his body screaming from bruises and burns. Yet for the first time in a decade, he felt whole. The ghosts of his past no longer pulled at him with chains of regret. He had kept his promise. He had fought not for money, not for pride, but for honor. And he had done it for a woman who had been a stranger to him just weeks ago, yet now felt carved into the marrow of his bones. They led the children out of the canyon at dawn. The air was cool, touched by the first blush of morning light. Their little faces, once gaunt with terror, now carried the flicker of cautious hope. They were free, free from the chains of forced labor, free from the cruel hands of Silas, free to walk back into the embrace of their people. Some limped, others leaned on one another, but in their eyes burned a light that would not be extinguished. Ezra guided them to a place few knew existed, a hidden settlement tucked into the folds of the land, where a remnant of her people had built refuge away from the gaze of soldiers and speculators. It was a village of quiet strength, of songs sung low, of fires that carried warmth instead of smoke. Here they would be safe. Here the children could be children again. And here, at the crossroads of their journey and his, the time for parting came. The sun was sinking, painting the sky with molten copper, rose, and violet streaks that bled across the horizon. She stood before him, her copper-toned skin glowing in the light of the dying day, her hair catching the wind like a dark flame. Her eyes, so often veiled in guarded silence, now held a depth Ezra had never seen: gratitude, sorrow, and something unspoken that pressed against his chest like a blade. "You saved them, Ezra," she said softly, her voice carrying over the quiet rustle of evening. "You saved my people. You are a man of your word. You are a good man." Ezra swallowed hard. A lump rose in his throat like stone. "I was just doing what was right," he managed, but the words were not enough. What he wanted to tell her was that she had saved him, too. That she had given him a reason to fight again, a reason to live, a reason to stand beneath this sky and believe that redemption was possible. But the words caught, unformed, in the desert of his tongue. He had always been a man of action, not of speeches. Yet she seemed to understand what he could not say. She reached out, her hand roughened by calluses, by hardship and survival. When her palm touched his, it sent an electric jolt through him. Her touch was gentle, a whisper against the noise of the world. "The world is wide, Ezra," she said. "You have a new purpose now. Your honor is restored. You are free." Her words cut him open and healed him all at once. She mounted her horse, a wild Mustang she had tamed with nothing but patience and spirit. Behind her, the children climbed onto ponies and mules, forming a procession like a river winding toward its destiny. She turned in the saddle one last time, and for the first time since he had met her, she smiled. A rare, luminous smile, filled with gratitude, with shared victory, with the promise of futures unwritten. She didn't ask him to come. She didn't need to. She knew his place was here, among the endless mesas and canyons, where he could finally wrestle his ghosts and find a kind of peace. He had found his redemption, and she had found hers. The horizon swallowed them slowly. Her silhouette, copper against the sun's last fire, grew smaller until it was no more than a memory pressed into the desert. The children followed, their laughter faint but real, carried by the wind. Ezra stood there long after the dust had settled, his heart full and empty at once. What they had shared was more than a fleeting romance. It was love of another kind, tempered by fire, forged in sacrifice, a love that spoke not of possession but of purpose. It was a Wild West love story, a cowboy love story, but not the kind sung by drunks in saloons, nor the kind penned in dime novels. It was a story of honor reclaimed, of justice wrested from greed, of redemption clawed from the jaws of despair. It was a love story written in blood, sweat, and tears, across the wide, merciless canvas of the desert. As the stars pricked holes into the darkening sky, Ezra lifted his face to the night. For the first time in years, he felt no weight pressing him down. He was free, free to live, free to love the land, free to carry this story within him until his dying day. She had taken the children, the map, and her people's future. He had kept his promise, and in doing so, he had kept his soul. Today's story is about pains that once seemed without end, until the faintest light broke through the darkness. Do you believe, my friend, that even in the bleakest of times, miracles wait at the edge of the road? If somewhere in your heart you believe God still watches, quietly arranging the pieces, then leave a comment below, write, Amen. Who knows? Perhaps at the very moment you write it, a blessing may quietly begin its journey toward him. She said, "Call him savage all you want. I see a man worth saving." The dust hung thick in the afternoon air, coating Red Rock Gulch in grit. The town square, just a patch of earth between the saloon and the assay office, was crowded. Men in worn hats and sweat-darkened shirts clustered together, their voices rising and falling like heat off the ground. Women in calico dresses stood back, children pressed to their skirts, all drawn by the grim spectacle. At the center stood Sheriff Dalton, his badge catching the harsh sun. Beside him, shackled, was a broad-shouldered man with silver-streaked hair, wrists raw from rusted chains. Yet he held his head high, dignity untouched by iron. "My name is Caleb Stone. Weeks ago I was a ghost wandering the high desert, a soldier broken by a lost war. My honor gone, my heart a tombstone, my life reduced to whiskey and the empty hope of gold. Now I was accused of treachery, condemned to be bonded out like an animal for a crime I never committed." "Step right up," Dalton barked, his voice booming across the square. "Got a traitor here caught helping Apaches steal from decent folks. $50 to start." The crowd stirred. Spittle flew. "Traitor!" someone shouted. "Indian lover!" another jeered. Their words flew like stones, and though I stood in chains, I didn't flinch. Their hatred mirrored my past. They called men like me ghost walkers, half seen, never trusted, cursed to wander between two worlds. A memory rose unbidden, a homestead burning, children screaming, a mother struck down. I had been there, silent in the smoke, rifle heavy in my hands, watching instead of stopping it. That silence weighed heavier than any chain. Now, as I faced the jeers, I saw the same darkness in their faces, the cruelty men carry when law is just a mask. My life had been nothing but regret and dust. The only thing that kept me standing was a name whispered in gulches and canyons, Ilara, the last Apache ghost, a girl who had lost her kin to greed and fire, who lived wild and untamed. In her story, I recognized my own. Then her voice split the air. "Don't sell him." The crowd shifted, surprise cutting through their cruelty. Through them came a woman like no other. Skin the color of earth, hair braided with beads and feathers, storm-gray eyes blazing with defiance. Elada, known in town as the Wild One, too proud to tame, too stubborn to break. "I'll buy him," she said, steady though her hands trembled. Dalton sneered. "Now see here,